The storm was strong, and the residents of the southern water tribe stayed in their houses, trying to stay warm until the bad weather would pass. They thought it would be like any other storm, but no, this one was persistent. It went on for days, and people dared not go outside unless necessary. Nini lived a bit farther from others. She learned how to take care of herself. She needed no help from others, as if she preferred loneliness. But being trapped in her home for such a long time was not the ideal situation. She hoped the storm would stop soon, but that never seemed to happen. 2 weeks into the storm, the wind stopped howling for a quick moment, as if everything froze in time for a second. It was in that moment that she heard a voice come from the outside, calling her name. She figured it was someone from the village, so she went outside. She looked from her doorstep, but no one was there. She then went ahead a few steps so that she'd have a better view of the landscape, but again, no one was there. After a minute, she went back to her house, but something strange occurred. She noticed the steps leading into her home, but they were not hers. They couldn't have been. She only exited a few moments ago. She did not go back until this very moment. Nini thought for a second what to do, but it was cold outside, and she decided to go inside anyway. If anyone was there, it was probably someone from the village. She stepped in, only to see a figure dressed in all black, standing next to the fireplace. Upon hearing her come in, the figure turned towards her. "Nini, I missed you." Nini, scared upon seeing an unfamiliar man in her home, ran outside into the storm that was now strong again. She did not recognize the voice that spoke her name, and she felt the only right option was to run and seek help. She screamed loudly, but there was no way anyone could hear her. The snow was deep. She couldn't move quickly, and she could barely see. She had no idea where she was going. If only she could reach the first house, she'd feel safe. But she was just a young woman, and after a few minutes of persistent running, she felt tired, exhausted. She was cold, too. The weather was freezing. She couldn't go on, but she didn't want to go back. After a few more seconds, she fell onto the ground, unconscious. Once she woke up, she had no idea if only a few minutes have passed, or hours, or days. But what she did know was that she was again in her house, feeling weak, but kept under many blankets so that she wouldn't be cold. "Why do you fear me?" The voice spoke from the corner of the room. Nini looked in the direction of the sound and saw the same man standing there. He was looking at her, but it felt like he was almost shy or afraid of her. He had his head hanging down. The black coat he wore was now on the chair next to him. When they told me that you're not even going to remember me, I didn't believe them. I thought that they were just jealous because my wish was the only one that was granted. I spent an entire lifetime chained and distant from everyone I loved, just to come here and see that you are afraid of me. You didn't even recognize me, and that hurts the most. I endured all the pain imaginable so that I can come back and be beside you. They told me I was making a mistake, but I didn't listen. So many voices told me I was wrong, and I ignored them. Fool. His voice was now somewhat familiar, as if Nini heard it before. Not only that, but she knew it. The texture and the inflections of his voice were of someone she knew very closely. "Could it be?" Nini whispered, but the man could hear her. "I'm here," he said, and made a step closer, but not too close. He didn't want to scare her. She spoke, stuttering. "Hikori?" she asked, and her eyes sparked. "Yes," the man happily shouted. "It's me, Nini, it's me," he repeated like a joyful child. "Hikori, how could it be?" she asked. He was not supposed to be there now. "And what's that on your face?" The man was wearing what appeared to be a mask. If he didn't have it, this confusion could have been avoided. "I'm scared," he replied, honestly, and went back to the corner of the room, sitting down on the chair. "I've changed, Nini." "Changed?" she asked. "Yes. When I saw you were that afraid of just my shadow, I can only imagine how terrified you'd be if you actually saw me up close." The pain in his voice was evident ever since she mentioned the mask on his face. "When you went to fight in the war, I felt pain like I never experienced before in my life. You took a part of me with you. Whatever it is that you're hiding right now, it can't hurt me more than that." Nini wanted to convince him that whatever he was hiding, he could tell her, and she wouldn't leave him. "Do you really wish to know the truth?" Hikori asked, as if begging her for her to say yes. "I do," she replied sincerely. "As you say," he confirmed. "But first, let me tell you everything that happened to me." "If that is your wish," she said, and stood up with the back against the wall, waiting patiently for him to begin. "I am not sure you will believe me when you hear it." "Only one way to find out," she replied gently. "Fine," he said, and paused for a moment. "When I went to fight in the war against the Fire Nation, I expected many horrors to be unleashed upon us. And that's exactly what happened. Lots of men died. Mothers watched their kids being taken away by the soldiers. Many people have been captured, tortured. I ended up in a prison where they interrogated me on the whereabouts of our people and threatened me with my life and lives of many others. I didn't tell them anything, and eventually I managed to escape with the help of other prisoners. Most of them followed me back to our safe camp and joined our resistance. Then I thought the horrors were over. All of that began to happen again and again, and I realized that we were fighting in vain. There were so many of them and so few of us. We were not a bigger threat to them than one common thief. So one day I decided to tell the rest of the men I'm not going to fight anymore. I still had the strength, but my will was broken. All I could think about is you, and how much rather I'd spend my time with you. Some of the men were angry, and some have proclaimed me as a traitor, and I didn't look back. I've made my decision, and I stood by it. I headed back to the South Pole the same night I told them I was going to leave the Resistance. I had no money, no ship. I didn't know anyone, and neither would I trust strangers. Soon, the time took its toll, and I became a thief myself. I stole some things from honest people. Clothes, money, food. I had to. I couldn't let anything stop me on my way here. After many weeks, I was only an ocean away from you. I managed to take the spot of some poor guy that was supposed to work on the ship, and I sailed away from the land. When we got closer to the end point, I had no choice but to steal one of their smaller boats and continue on my own. I took some food with me, sat on the boat, and began to paddle. There was still a long way ahead of me, but I did not surrender, not even to the stormy nights and angry waves that could have crushed me in the matter of seconds. After a while, my arms and legs felt heavy. My skin was cold and sore, and I felt like I was going to shatter into a million pieces. But then, with the rising moon, I felt like I was very close to our village. I did not recognize anything around me, though. Water was the same, and glaciers were white and big as always, but I knew I was close. So I found more strength and began to paddle faster and faster, only to be interrupted. A beam of light appeared underneath me from the ocean and onto the sky, and everything was white around me. I couldn't see or hear anything. When I realized I was not even in my boat anymore, I got scared. I feared I was going to fall, or that I'm even dead already, perhaps. But then I began to observe. Small and countless number of yellow and brown dots flashed before my eyes, and I had a feeling like I was falling. Soon, dots became stains, and stains turned into the clear images, and I found myself lying in the puddle of water. I looked around me and I realized that I was not in the ocean anymore. I was surrounded by trees and their roots. They seemed dead, I couldn't hear birds nor any other animal. I wasn't even sure where I was, so I thought that maybe I was dreaming, even though everything around me felt too real and tangible. I began to walk, stumbling over the roots and dead branches. I heard many sounds from which I could not define what could have possibly made them. After some time, which seemed like a few hours, I saw a cave ahead of me. It was on higher ground, but I had to climb it. I didn't have any reason to go there, but I wanted to. After I climbed and I came in front of the entrance, I stepped inside. That was the worst mistake I could have made. It wasn't dark. I could see most of the things around me, but something got me by surprise. I didn't know what that thing was. It looked like a scorpion, but it was enormous. 20 times bigger than me, at least. And he jumped right in front of me. I was terrified, and I fell on my back. I saw a strange face on that thing. It looked like some sort of mask. And he started laughing. I was terrified. I couldn't move. For my entire time in the war, I was never that disturbed. Before I even realized what happened, I felt lightheaded, and soon I passed out. At least, that's what I thought. When I regained consciousness, I couldn't see anything. Darkness surrounded me, but I did hear a lot of voices. Some of men, some of women, some of children, even animals. I didn't know what was happening, but I thought I was captured again. And I was. Slowly, thin light appeared in front of my eyes. Then it became bigger and wider, and soon I was able to see everything. I was still in a cave, but when I looked beneath me, I was stunned. Right there on the ground where I fell was my body, still lying there, only face down. I wanted to think how that cannot be true, but then I began to move. I could hear a deep, gravelly male voice laughing quietly. From the sides of my view, a couple of tentacles appeared, took my body and rolled it on its back, and I saw that I was faceless. My head was stripped away of eyes, ears, nose, just a blank, empty skin. I was in disbelief. It must be a nightmare, I thought, but no, it was real. The same male voice began to laugh louder and louder, and I heard him say, "This gives me so much satisfaction. It's been a while since I've added a human face to my collection." I began to scream, but darkness surrounded me once again, and I couldn't do anything. I couldn't run away from that. My body, which was dead for all I knew, was left aside, and I could have possibly been dinner for that thing. "Hey, Corey, calm down," Nini said. "This story sounds unreal, but I want to believe you." She had to stop him, as he was getting too upset by remembering all the horrors from his memory. "You have to believe me, Nini. That's what happened. I'm not lying to you. You know I never did. Please believe me. Everything I'm telling you is exactly what happened." "Please, Hikori, calm down. I will. I'll believe you. Just give me some time to digest all of that. There's so much you said, and I don't know how to take it." "But there's so much more, Nini. So much more," Hikori continued. After a while, I accepted that I was not going anywhere anytime soon, but I did realize that the monster did not care for my body. He just dragged it in the back of the cave, hid it behind a big rock, and that's it. He showed no sign of interest in having it for lunch like I feared before. I was worried that he was going to eat it because there were no other bodies around, but no, he only took my face. That's the only part he was interested about. Also, I saw that my body was not changing. It still looked fresh. I realized that wherever I was, time did not have the same effect on our bodies. After a few days, I presume, I began to hear a lot of voices, but this time I could understand them. I found it hard to keep up with them because there were so many, and they all talked at the same time, but I did manage to distinguish the difference between irrelevant and relevant talk. My hearing got better after a while, and I was able to separate the questions that were important and directed at me from those that didn't talk to me. So I started to answer to them. What were they saying? Nini asked, intrigued by Hikori's story. A lot of things. They began with introducing themselves and asking me about my life, but there was one thing I thought before talking to them. I thought that maybe I was being punished for bad deeds I've done, and how I was brought to that horrible place for those reasons. But talking to them, I realized that there were a lot of good people there, as well as kids, and kids are too young to do anything so bad deserving of that faith. There was a young man called Luno. He, and also many others, were brought to that place the same way I was. Well, not with a beam of light, but with some sort of unnatural happening. Luno had fallen into a hole for which he thought was not deep, and ended up in the puddle, just like I did. Luno was the only person I continued to talk to. He was young, honest, hard-working man who did not deserve that kind of fate at all. He told me that no one ever escaped from that place, and how it was impossible for them to escape. But not for me. I figured that none of them had their bodies with them. They all somehow got dragged out of the cave or disappeared, thanks to some magical process, Luno told me. But my body was still there, behind the rock. But what was that thing? Nini asked. His name is Ko. He's one of the oldest spirits in the spirit world, and that's where I was. The spirit world is a place like ours, physical, but it's a home to a lot of spirit creatures and other entities for which I believe are immortal. Ko is one of them. But how and why does it steal faces? I don't know. There are a lot of creatures in the spirit world, as I understand. Every single one has its purpose. Or maybe it doesn't, I don't know. But if he has a purpose, it's somehow all connected to stealing faces. He's doing that whenever a person who's looking at him makes some expression. Doesn't matter if you're terrified like me, or happy, or sad, or angry, confused. If he sees any kind of emotion on your face, he's going to take it away from you. That is unbelievable? Hikori asked. Yes, but also terrifying. I can't imagine such a thing. And you never will, hopefully. So how did you manage to escape? I am not sure. I mean, he allowed me to go for some reason. I don't think he sympathized with me. He didn't seem like he cared for anyone else's future. He only wanted as many faces as possible. But there was something odd about him. Perhaps he listened to my every conversation with others, and was interested in what I was going to do if he let me go. Maybe my body being so close to him was something that made him feel strange, if he felt anything at all, so he decided to release me. I guess I won't find out. I hope I won't. When he let me go, everyone began to scream in anger. I understand that they felt even more hurt for not letting them go, but I thought maybe some of them would be glad that at least one person managed to leave. But even Luna was angry. When he attached my face back on the body, I felt weak and disoriented. It took me some time to get back on my feet, and what completely occupied my mind was the fact that out of the cave, everything still looked the same. When I was detached from my body, I felt like I was spending a whole eternity in there. I thought I was going to see some change, whether it be on my body or outside, but nothing has changed. Time in the spirit world definitely doesn't pass the same as in our world. I could have been in there for a few days only, but it felt a lot longer. When I began to climb down, my arms gave up and I fell in the puddle of water again. I was stumbling, only this time more than the first. I didn't know where I was headed, but I needed to go as far as possible from that cave. On my slow walk, I've seen some insects that do not exist in our world. But once I saw a giant animal that looked like a badger wolf, I had to hide behind the first tree. It was the biggest living thing I have ever seen, and I thought it was going to eat me if it sees me. Then, when it wasn't close anymore, I continued to walk, and soon I felt light as air. The next thing I remember, I was floating on the freezing ocean near the village. I began to swim, and once I managed to get to your home through this blizzard, I knew everything was going to be well, finally. Nini was silent. Hikori's story was both interesting and childish, but it felt truthful. Could she really believe him? "Well, do you believe me?" Hikori asked her. I'm not sure in what I believe in anymore, but I know that you have always been honest, and I don't see the reason you had to come up with that story." "I'm telling you the truth, but there's one more thing you need to know, so please promise me you won't be scared." "What is it?" "Nini, please, you need to promise. I can't continue if you don't, please." "I promise." "Well, then," Hikori said and stood up. He moved slowly near her and stood in the place where there was more light. "Hi," he said and took off his hood. Nini's eyes widened from shock, and she stopped breathing. Hikori's face was not a human face anymore, or at least not a normal human face. His eyes were moved to each other and placed in the middle of his face. His mouth was on the right side of his face, and his nose wasn't there. There were only 2 small holes under his eyes, blowing the cold air out. He looked more like an insect than a human. When Nini saw how Hikori looked, she didn't know what to say. The only thing she was able to do was scream. "Nini, don't! Stop!" poor Hikori was saying, but she couldn't help herself. She was terrified, and her lungs had an unstoppable urge to shout. "It's still me, Nini. I'm still Hikori." But she didn't listen. Hikori began to shake her, but she was hitting him, trying to move him away from her. He wasn't even human anymore, she thought. He spent so much time in the spirit world among those creatures that he became one himself. Once he realized that there was nothing he could do to calm her down, he put back his mask and turned around. "I thought you would be able to look past this." Nini stopped screaming. "I loved you, always, and I still do." "I don't love you," Nini said quietly. "What?" he asked her in disbelief. "I don't love you, Hikori, and I never did. When you left, I didn't care. I never thought of you in a romantic way. You were a friend to me. But I was not a friend to you. If you haven't been so blinded by your love for me, you could have seen it." Hikori was just standing there, empty and defeated. He tried so hard to get back to her, to be with her and love her, even if she didn't love him back anymore, but she never loved him in the first place. Ko took his face and gave it back to him, damaged, but Nini took his heart and shattered it in pieces. No, she didn't take his heart away. He gave it away to her and got only pain and disappointment in return. "Perhaps in other circumstances, you could love me back," Hikori said, practically begging her to lie to him. "No, I never did, and never will," Nini coldly replied. Hikori could not stand hearing those words anymore, so he grabbed her by the arms and dragged her outside. She was screaming, but no one was able to hear her from the blizzard. "Let me go!" she was yelling, but he didn't listen to her. "Leave me alone, you monster!" Hikori stopped, took his mask off and kneeled down with his face as close as possible to hers. "This is what my love towards you has done to me," he blinked. "You are worse than him," he said and continued to drag her in the silence. She wasn't resisting, she wasn't yelling. Hikori dragged her into the ocean and kept her there with her head above the water to slowly freeze to death. The blizzard was starting to pass, and she was almost dead. Her skin wasn't even pale anymore. She almost turned blue, and she looked frozen. "Perhaps I deserve to be faceless," he said, and his body fell heavily on the snow. The blizzard stopped. Nini began to drown, and for a moment she thought she did, as everything turned dark in front of her eyes. She then came about and found she was still holding onto Hikori's body. She somehow dragged herself up. When she looked at him, his face was gone. Since the blizzard stopped, she headed back to her home, only to find her friend Kaya sitting inside. "I'm so cold, and I can't get warm," Nini said. Kaya turned around and saw Nini standing at the door, looking like she's frozen. so she ran outside to get someone to help her. When they came back, she wasn't there anymore. Since that day, Nini's house was empty, and no one ever lived in it again. But people say that they sometimes see smoke coming out from the chimney, as if little Nini is still trying to get warm.